My name is Jake Field. I'm an expedition leader, adventure travel guide, and the founder of Ultimate Adventure Travel. Over the years, I have helped hundreds of people step out of their comfort zone and into some of the world's most incredible places, Kilimanjaro, Everest Base Camp, and the Inca Trail. But this podcast isn't just about the destinations. It's about what happens on the trail, the friendships you build, the challenges you overcome, and the confidence that you gain. So welcome to the Ultimate Adventure Travel Podcast. This is your weekly guide to preparing for unforgettable group adventures and getting the most out of every single one. In each episode, I'll share practical advice, inspiring stories from past travellers, and expert interviews. We'll cover training tips, altitude prep, packing, planning, mindset, and all the things no one tells you before you sign up. Whether you're planning your very first trip or you're the one in the group who's always got another adventure lined up, this podcast is here to help you feel confident, ready, and excited about what's ahead. So hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you want to get started today, you'll find free downloadable guides to some of our most popular trips linked in the show notes. Or head straight over to ultimateadventuretravel.co.uk to see where we're heading next. Thanks for being here. Let's get into it. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's great to have you.
Yeah, nice to see you, Jake. Nice to catch up again as always.
Nice to catch up. I do have a question that I think is going to set the scene for everybody listening. And my question is, what do you think the biggest mistake is that people make when training for altitude?
I think the biggest mistake people make when they travel for the mountains is they underestimate the impact that altitude can have on them. For some people, altitude has no impact at all and they deal with it really, really nicely and never have to worry. But for others, they really, really struggle with the altitude. And I think people forget that. You read stories of your 70-year-old grandma climbing Kili or of, 80-year-old people living in the Himalayas and never having suffered. But the way your body deals with altitude is completely independent of your age, your fitness, your gender, your ethnicity. It's completely genetic. So some people deal with it really nicely. Some people really struggle with it. I think people forget to contend that when they're thinking of trips like to Carl, Kilimanjaro, or Everest Base Camp.
Yeah, well, that's something that I remember I learned when we first started talking years ago now, when I started training a bit more seriously for some of those bigger climbs up to Everest Base Camp and Kilimanjaro. And I was really surprised to learn that it was genetic. And I know that there's a lot of training you can do to improve your results. But yeah, the foundation is that until you've gone through the training and found out how you cope at altitude, you are taking a bit of a stab in the dark unless you go. And for a lot of people, I think that was the old way of doing it, wasn't it? Is that they would go on a trip and they would either be okay with the altitude or they wouldn't. Whereas now you can simulate that beforehand.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that way of doing things is sometimes still the right way for people to do it. Like some people really like the unknown. They really like that sense of will I be okay, will I not be okay? But for others in the modern world where, let's be honest, these trips aren't the cheapest holidays in the world, and they can take up quite a lot of annual leave, and we always like to look after our annual leave, and people invest a lot in these trips as well, whether that's fundraising or emotions or times and things like that. In the modern world and due to modern tech and modern science, yeah, what we can do is we can put you through your paces in simulated altitude. So replicate the exact conditions that you're going to face on whatever mountain you're going to and see how your body's going to cope. And we can get that answer beforehand of, am I more at risk of suffering altitude? If so, what do we do about it? Or if I'm less at risk of suffering altitude, fantastic. It's one less thing to worry about. You can focus on all the other bits of prep, like the kit, like the training, like the food, like the admin, like the logistics, the visas, all those other bits that we've got to consider as well. And it just puts one less stress to the back of your mind. So yeah, we can find out before you go whether you're more or less at risk. And then depending on that data, come up with a plan if we need to.
Okay, so I've got Everest Base Camp booked, or I've got a Kilimanjaro trip booked.
Yeah.
They tend to be the ones where people experience altitude for the first time. They're trekking peaks. What are my first steps? So I've got my trip booked. What do I do now if I want to start preparing for altitude properly?
So the first thing to do if you're preparing to altitude is just go online and actually read about it, like understand what challenge you've got coming our way. We've got loads of bits on our blogs about kind of altitude 101s, what to expect and things like that. And there's some interesting stuff out there. Some of it via ChatGPT is a little bit up and down, as it always is with ChatGPT, but the majority of it has a good fundamental and good scientific basis. But for those who then want to find out actually what it's like to go to altitude and get some tangible data collected, one of the things we offer here at the Altitude Centre is high altitude testing. I know it's something you've undergone in the past. And what we can do is take you up to simulated heights of either 5,000 or 6,000 meters, depending on where you're climbing to. So if we're looking at Everest Base Camp or Kal or Kilimanjaro, all the way through to like an Aconcagua or those sorts of climbs. And what we can do is find out whether you're more or less at risk of suffering altitude sickness over those heights. And then, as I said, depending on that data, that's then what formulates any future actions. For some people, there's no level of risk and they go and have lots and lots of fun. Like we both know hundreds of people who've climbed Kili and Everest Base Camp with no issues at all. And if you're one of those people, fantastic. It's one less thing to stress about. But if the testing identifies you're more at risk, and we've both seen people really either not finish trips or have really quite a torrid time on the mountains and not enjoy it at all, we can then look at a few pre-acclimation strategies to help mitigate and manage that risk. So when you go out there, you have as much fun as you can and you enjoy the trip like everybody else does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that with people on trips where some are just really, really comfortable at altitude and
Yeah.
others really struggle. And I get asked quite often, I don't know whether you do, people will ask me, well, who is more likely to be at risk of suffering with altitude? Can you tell at the beginning of the trip? And my answer is always no, because there are people who, without sounding rude, you might look at and go, well, you're not as fit as the triathlete who has come on this trip. You smoke, you drink, but actually they can sometimes end up performing better and vice versa. So I can never tell until we get there.
No, and you also find people who are absolutely fine at one height, 2 days later, are really struggling. And it's almost like they just go over a threshold. And, like, for example, at Namche Bazaar, they're feeling really, really strong, but they get to Dingboche or Perioche and they're really struggling again. And, that's where your body's just got to the point where it just can't quite cope with that hypoxia. It can't quite cope with that lack of oxygen. And you're exactly right. There are no like markers for altitude sickness in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, and all of those sort of things that we know. Like fitness is the biggest one. It's the biggest kind of thing that people say to us. It's like, oh, I'm fit. I've run marathons. I'll be fine. It's like, fantastic. You'll be fine with the walking part then. Like from the physical demand of walking, you'll have no issues. But that doesn't eliminate or mitigate the risk of altitude sickness. And some of the best data I've seen is from those who you would look at and consider to be very, very unfit. And some of the worst data I've seen is from very, very high-end sportsmen and women. Equally, I have seen it the other way around as well, where very, very fit people deal with altitude really well, and very unfit people don't deal with it very well. But it's not a mark to say you will or won't be okay. There is that kind of spectrum that altitude sits on.
I think there's a really famous example of when Ben Fogle was climbing Mount Everest and he was initially going to go up with Victoria Pendleton and they
Yeah,
got to Everest Base Camp and Victoria Pendleton beyond that started really, really struggling. Now they'd summited Aconcagua a few months prior as training, but she really, really struggled going beyond base camp. Clearly that was her limit. And you can't argue that she isn't an incredibly fit individual. So that for me was quite eye opening that really it fitness only gets you so far.
yeah, and the fitness is key. Like, if you're not fit, you're really going to struggle on these trips from the physical element. But yeah, if
Yes.
you don't deal with the altitude, it doesn't matter how fit you are, you don't actually get to show it because other parts of your body start to break down, and you start to show the signs of altitude sickness quite early. And as we both know, like when it comes to altitude sickness, you do have to be careful and you do have to think about a climber's well-being first and foremost because things can turn reasonably serious quite quickly at altitude. And the evacuation routes and things like that aren't always the cleanest, particularly if there's weather coming in or other factors as well. So altitude sickness, you have to catch before it gets serious because once it gets serious, you then have longer term repercussions as well. So it's just about giving yourself the best opportunity, not only to make it to the top of wherever your trip is going, but also enjoy the whole experience as well. And we always say that to climbers, like goal one is summit, and that's like a non-negotiable. Goal two is I want you to enjoy the whole experience. And like we've both watched the sunrise over Kili and had a lot of fun, but I can still remember that like it was yesterday. But I know there are people who've summited Kili and maybe not always enjoyed that experience because they've been throwing up, because they've had those migraine style headaches. And actually, for me, the worst symptom is actually memory loss. Like some people who've been there only know the photo. They don't actually remember doing it because they've just had so little oxygen going to the brain that, those memories just weren't formed. So yeah, it's a really good point around fitness, and it's something for people to consider. Yes, you have to be fit, but that doesn't mitigate the risk of altitude sickness.
So we've spoken about altitude sickness quite a lot. And I know that when I was doing a lot of Googling around altitude, when I was starting on this journey of going to what's considered high altitude, for me, there were a couple of questions I had. One of them was, what is considered going to high altitude? Other is, what is altitude sickness?
Yeah, so two separate questions there. So what we consider altitude is broken into kind of three blocks. So what's considered altitude, or where there is a risk of altitude sickness, is anything over 2,500 meters, which isn't really that high. That being said, not many people struggle at 2,500 meters. That's skiing height. Altitude is broken into three bands. You get low altitude, which is 0 to 3,000 meters, which is a lot of holidays, skiing, that sort of thing. And for most people, they don't need to worry at all about that. You then get moderate altitude, which is 3,000 to 5,000 meters. That's where some people may start to feel the impacts of altitude, and some people may, if they have a slightly higher tolerance, a slightly poorer tolerance to altitude, or a slightly higher risk of altitude sickness, may start to struggle. That encapsulates your Mont Blancs, your Tube Carls, or South American trips like Machu Picchu. And then you get extreme altitude, which is anything over 5,000 meters. At that point, you'll start to see significantly more people feel the impacts of altitude and start to fall onto that spectrum of altitude sickness. Now, altitude sickness, which is the second part of that question, is a spectrum, and it goes from mild to moderate to severe. And they're kind of three brackets that we have. Mild altitude sickness, for all intents and purposes, feels like a hangover. So it's like nausea, grumpiness, sleep disturbance, fatigue, loss of appetite, headaches. Nothing too serious, nothing that's going to stop your trip, but just being a little bit uncomfortable. The next stage after that is moderate altitude sickness, which is vomiting, migraine style headaches, and you start to develop ataxia, which is a change in like coordinational movements or a change in like personality. That's the point where decisions then start to be made, or conversations start to be had around kind of people moving forward. Because if you're no longer holding your food down, or you're no longer walking in a straight line and things, then decisions have to be made about someone's well-being. That is to stop you getting to severe altitude sickness, which is fluid on the lung, fluid on the brain, and ultimately ends in rescue. Now, altitude can get that severe, and it's really important that people understand that, and that, you know, these trips do have a inherent level of risk. Like, it's not saying you're going to get it, and that's not what I'm saying at all, but you have to be aware that this could happen, and you have to be understand and accept that. But it is a spectrum, and you don't just get on the mountain and instantly need a rescue. Like, there are symptoms beforehand that the team, the guides, the Sherpas, whoever you're climbing with, as well as the company you're climbing with, look after you and go, right, these are the symptoms you're showing. This is what the blood oxygen data looks like, which I know we've spoken about in the past. And they're the little pulse oxes that you put on people's fingers every morning and every evening. And it's just about catching people when and if they are suffering from the altitude, to then help them as much as they can, because you can do things like take paracetamol. You've got ibuprofen. You've got kind of local remedies in the pool in South America that can help with vasodilation. So like helping the blood vessels get a bit bigger so you can just get blood flowing a little bit easier. Like, none of those are long-term issues, but they do give a quick short-term fix. And then it's just about making sure that you help somebody in terms of the exercise load. So leaving a little bit early, getting to camp a little bit late, not carrying a rucksack, like splitting the group into a fast and slow group. All of those things are help to help people if they are suffering or on the verge of suffering, just mitigate and manage those symptoms as much as they can, because they're not going to get better because you're not going to come down, but it's just stopping them from getting worse. Does that make sense?
So really, the only cure for altitude sickness is to come down.
Yeah. If you are suffering from altitude sickness to that extent, like, the only form of cure is descent. For some people, they might be able to spend an extra day or two at a certain camp and then continue climbing. But on a lot of itineraries, you don't have that space. Like, the only one that jumps out to me is Everest Base Camp, with one day at Namche Bazaar and one day normally at Perioche Dingboche, depending on the itinerary, where you may get a day. But but even for some people, that's not enough. And you look at Kili, like, there isn't a spare day on Kili to add that day. Like, you've got to go again and again and again. So if you are struggling, it's about making sure it doesn't get any worse, because it's not going to get any better if you're going to continue to climb higher.
Okay, so what steps can I start taking then when that trip begins to really improve my chances of being able to deal with the altitude, especially on like an Everest Base Camp trip where it's quite a long trip, so I'm going to be at altitude for an extended period of time?
Yeah, so when you're on the mountain, so we split altitude into pre-trip and on-trip. So if we look at the on-the-trip stuff and things you can do when you're on the mountain, we have four golden rules, which are eat lots, like food is fuel. Don't think about not eating. Don't think about trying to restrict calorie intake. Make sure you get as much food as you can. You want it to be carbohydrate heavy. That's our fuel sources. You probably want a little bit of protein, but not too much. And then it's about taking your own snacks. I know we've had fierce debates over what snacks work best, but we always come back to sweets and chocolate. At the end of the day, food is fuel. So eat lots. Rule number 2 is drink lots. Depending on male or female and the size of the climber, somewhere between 3 to 6 litres a day, which is quite a lot of fluid. So you've got eat lots, drink lots, sleep lots. This isn't always the easiest to do at altitude. Some people really struggle with their sleep, but take an eye mask, take earplugs, and make sure you've got the right sleeping bag so you're warm. And even if you can't sleep, just rest. It just gives your body a chance just to decompress, just to deload, and just start to make some adaptations just whilst there's a lower aerobic load on it. So you've got eat lots, drink lots, sleep lots, and then just move really, really slowly. Kili's famous for this with this phrase "pole pole," but it is about moving slowly. Like, you're not in a rush. You are on the mountain for 7, 10, 14 days. You're not going to miss any days by walking faster. And all you're going to be doing by rushing is spending more time at camp. And we both played more than enough games of cards over our lives in different base camps and different mountains around the world to find that it's great fun for the first 2 or 3 days, but once you keep losing at poker, you then kind of want to play a different game and find a different way to entertain yourself. So don't rush. Enjoy spending time on the mountain. Enjoy doing what you're there to do, which is enjoy the experience of the environment, and just don't be in a rush to get to base camp or the next camp in any way, shape, or form.
It's definitely something that I've really focused on with ultimate adventure travel, is focusing on the journey rather than the destination. And actually, for me, I've always said to people, don't judge your entire trip based on the 5 minutes you spend at the summit. And I think people are often surprised at how long you actually do spend on the summit of Kilimanjaro or at Everest Base Camp, because it isn't that long. It's an hour tops if you're waiting for other people to come in. I prefer
Yeah.
less than that. You want to get people back down and all the rest of it. So don't judge your entire trip based on that moment, because it's so short relative to the entire trip. And as you say, enjoy each step of the way. So that was that was preparation whilst on the trip. But you spoke a little bit about pre-trip training. Can you just go into
Yeah.
that in a bit more detail?
So that's what we specialize in here at the Altitude Centre, and it all starts ideally with that testing I spoke about earlier. It's about coming in and finding out whether you're more or less likely to suffer. If you're less likely to suffer, follow those on the trip rules, and the data says you've got a very low risk of suffering altitude sickness. But if the testing identifies you are more at risk of suffering altitude sickness, we can then look at different pre-acclimatization strategies that we can use to help mitigate and manage the risk of altitude sickness. They can be done at our site in London. So we've got different tools on site in London, ranging from passive exposure, so just sitting down, watching TV or reading a book or doing some work, through to active exposure, where you get you walking, moving, and exercising at 3, 4, 5, 6,000 meters. And then we also have at-home options for those not in the UK or those not in and around the city of London. Then we've got options where altitude generators can be sent to the house. You can do the pre-acclimation or all the altitude stuff at home. And the aim of that training is to increase your blood saturation, which again is the amount of oxygen in your body. Bring that number up. So increase the amount of oxygen bound to each red blood cell. So when you go to the mountains, there's more oxygen going around the body and more oxygen can get to the brain. And the aim of that is to reduce what we know is the incidence and severity of altitude sickness. So what that means is you're much less likely to suffer it, and if you do suffer it, it's only mild rather than moderate. So not only is the risk of suffering lower, but if you do get it, the symptoms are significantly lower.
So I would say to anybody that's listening or watching, I cannot recommend enough going to the Altitude Centre, going for an in-person consultation. If you can't get down there, having a conversation with one of the guys on the phone, and then looking at one of the home testing kits, because it's the most similar experience I've ever had to being at altitude. I will say it doesn't feel quite the same. And for me, I think that's because wearing a mask felt ever so slightly claustrophobic. And it's a very strange feeling when you're in the mountains and you haven't got anything covering your face, but you still feel like it's difficult to breathe. That becomes a little bit challenging. But as I say, anyone listening, I really would recommend, if you're going to Altitude, getting in touch. And you can find the Altitude Centre by going to ultimateadventuretravel.co.uk and going to our partners page, where you'll find links, and on the training page as well. And then you can get in touch and have a look at booking in. Is there any other way that they can do that, or any other material that you guys
Uh,
offer that would be useful?
I think that's probably the best way to. We're on all the social media and all that sort of stuff as well. And I think you're exactly right. To come back to what you said very quickly there, like the best way to get ready for the mountains is to go to the mountains. Like no one's ever disputed that, and nobody says that that isn't the best way. Like if you are in a lucky enough position where you can go and climb Mount Meru before you climb Kili, then please do. But for not for a lot of people, that isn't an option, whether that be cost, annual leave, etc., etc. So what we do is kind of the next best thing. Like if you can get to the mountains, go to the mountains because you do get that real world experience and it's a lot more fun. But as I said, for a lot of people, they can't do that. So that's where we come in, and it's about making sure that when you do these trips, you have as much fun as you can and you really enjoy the experience.
Absolutely. And as we said at the beginning, these trips aren't cheap. They're once in a lifetime for most people. Expeditions climbing Kilimanjaro and reaching Everest Base Camp for a lot of people will only happen once. And I think that for going through some pre-trip training, especially when it's altitude specific, can make a big difference. There isn't anything worse than not preparing in the best way possible and then getting there and feeling the consequences. Because as you say, even those that do make it, if you're really struggling, it takes all the enjoyment away from it. And actually, it's just as much about enjoying it.
Yeah, exactly. It's about, as I said, goal one is summit, goal two is enjoy the trip as well. And that is really key, whether it is Machu Picchu or Everest, it doesn't really matter. Like, you've got to make sure that you enjoy the experience, have fun of the experience, and it is that once in a lifetime trip because for a lot of people that is exactly what this will be.
So I've got a question. I don't think I've ever asked you this, but how long does being acclimatized last? So, for instance, if I was to go and climb Kilimanjaro and then I came down and I decided that I wanted to run up it, hypothetically,
Yeah,
then how long do I stay acclimatized for?
yeah, so after an exposure, like a decent exposure block on site, like we do, somewhere between 8 to 12 hours, or a climb like Kili, you're going to have somewhere between 7 and 14 days where your body is in a position where it is then ready to go and is in a position where it can deal with altitude really, really nicely. That is also exactly what happens on these big mountains. So, like we're recording this on the 20th of May. Like it is, we had this chat beforehand. This is the summit week for Everest. Like anybody who's listening to this when it's released, go back a couple of days and you'll see just how many people have been up and down Everest this year. But on those big mountains, you have what's known as rotations. You go high, you come back down. You go high, you come back down. And essentially, if you were to go and climb Kili and then come back down and then wanted to run up it, essentially what you've done there is a rotation. So you'd have 7 to 14 days after that summit at which you deal with altitude really, really nicely. So again, that's something we really make sure that when people are training with us here on site in London, that we make sure that that last exposure is really within that window. We ideally say 5 days to give you a little bit more wiggle room. And it also something to think about when people are planning their trips. Like if you want to do a safari, try to do it after the climb, not before the climb, because it just means if you do any pre-acclimation or you do any altitude training, you don't lose some of those benefits. Like you want to do your climb first and then your fun stuff afterwards, because it just makes sure that you get the most from any training that you do, and that you can kind of enjoy both as much as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Not taking away that time where you have acclimatized
Yeah.
before you go, especially if you've gone through the in-person testing at somewhere like the center. Okay, so I will stay acclimatized for a period of time. Once I've been to altitude, does that mean that I am more likely to acclimatize well on the next trip, or will I acclimatize quicker? Or is there a point after I've been up Kilimanjaro, let's say, whereas if I was to go again in 2 months' time, actually my body is going to take the same amount of time to acclimatize? Or is there a bit of a muscle memory thing going on?
So that's a really interesting one. And the truthful answer is, as a scientific community, we're not 100% sure on that yet, because no one really has the answer. What is safe to say is if you climbed Kili and then went back to Kili 2 months later, like all of those adaptations that you made 8 weeks ago will have gone away. Like you won't have any of those left. And it is a case of just because you've been okay at altitude once, it doesn't mean that you're going to be okay at altitude again. Like it's not uncommon for people to climb Everest Base Camp, have no issues, go and climb Kili and then really struggle because the nature of the mountain's different. You might have made different decisions around fueling, nutrition, all those sorts of factors as well. That being said, and anecdotally speaking, what we have seen is people who've gone through mountaineering journeys. So let's take somebody who climbed Kilimanjaro, really enjoyed it, then went to climb Aconcagua, really enjoyed it, climbed Amadablam, and is now on Everest, for example. Like that's a mountaineering journey ranging from the start to the finish of the mountaineering world. What you would typically tend to see is that they might not deal with the altitude better, but because they're not going to the unknown, they feel more comfortable and they psychologically can cope with it slightly better. They know what to expect in terms of any sleep disturbance or any breathlessness feelings or just that unknown. If you can remove that unknown, which is a big part of what we do here on site around the psychology of climbing, then it just makes you feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit less on edge. So that means if you're going through that journey or you're going to a climb you've never been to before, or climbing in a different way that you've not climbed before, whether like Everest Base Camp's a slightly slower climb, Kili's a slightly faster climb, like you don't have that unknown nature to it. Like that's really important as well. So I personally, I think there is probably some physiological adaptation or muscle memory, but what we've seen is it's much more around the psychology and just feeling more comfortable about having been there and done that before. That's where a lot of the benefits comes from people climbing multiple mountains.
Definitely experienced that myself, because I know the first time I climbed Kilimanjaro, I didn't know what to expect and I found it really difficult. And all of those things, that was actually my first time of being to a really high altitude. Um, but then when I came back the second time, I knew what to expect a little bit more. And what I say to people when we're on trips is, okay, all of you will feel the effects of being at altitude. Not all of you will get altitude sickness. And actually understanding what the effects of altitude are made me a lot less panicky about, oh my God, I've got altitude sickness. This is going to happen. I didn't overthink as much. I think once I was able to embrace the norm and go, oh, this is completely normal. My headache is normal. I just need to make sure I'm drinking lots of water. And exactly like you said, the 4 pillars: eat lots, drink lots, sleep lots, and go
Yeah,
really, really slow.
yeah, exactly.
That's
And
comforting.
understand that my heart will be beating faster. I will be breathing more often. I will be going to the toilet more. Like they're all natural things. That doesn't mean you have altitude sickness. It doesn't mean you're suffering. That just means your body's making changes and is put under stress because it's different. And understanding that is normal. And yes, if you are suffering from bad headaches, you are feeling sick, you are not eating, then you need to let somebody know. Like it's really important that you're honest with your symptoms. But equally, like don't worry if you wake up and have a headache. Drink a litre of water, and more than likely that will then clear up. Okay, if that persists, then the conversation needs to be had. But we have a good rule for a headache, which is drink a litre, take a paracetamol, wait an hour. Try that. Drink a litre, take paracetamol, wait an hour. Is that headache still there? Okay, it might be an underlying cause like altitude sickness. If it's gone, it was probably just dehydration, which a lot of people have when they wake up in the morning, because obviously you don't drink overnight. You wake up, you're dehydrated, you get your liquid in, and then the headache clears up. So little things like that can make a big difference, and just having the knowledge and the experience and the answers to those sort of worries is really important.
The question that I will ask people all the time on trips is, how much water have you had to drink today? Because in my experience, the symptoms of being at altitude, so headaches, nausea,
Yeah.
fatigue, are very, very similar to dehydration. So when I'm trying to establish exactly that, are you suffering with the effects of being at altitude, or are you dehydrated? How much water have you had to drink is always the first question.
Yeah, and if you drunk lots, it might be the altitude. If you haven't drunk lots, let's try that first and see if that clears up the issue. And that's exactly it. Like when we go climbing as a team, like even we sometimes forget to do that, and we always remind each other. It's like, oh, you haven't drunk anything because that bottle's still full. And it's like, yeah, even we forget sometimes, and we do this day in, day out. So it is just a case of trying to stay on top of it and just being a little bit disciplined about it. When I climb, I try to drink a litre at breakfast, 1, 2, or 3 litres walking during the day, and then a litre at dinner. And suddenly I'm at 3, 4, 5 litres just in the day, and I haven't really had to think about it too much. So that's a nice way that I break it up, just to make my life easier, make sure I get the volume of liquid in that I need in.
That's a really good way to break it down, because I think 5 litres can sound really intimidating
Yeah,
for people. But when you break it down in that way of going, okay, well, before we've even got up to leave, because you'll have time over breakfast, you'll be
for a
sat in the tea
coffee,
houses.
for some
Exactly.
water, some orange juice. Like it's not just water; it's just fluid. 2 or 3 litres whilst you're walking, like Camelback, just kind of suck away on it, make sure you finish that off, and then once you get back to camp with dinner and with playing cards and everything like that, just keep sipping on the bottle. Make sure you're drunk enough. Yes, you'll go to a toilet a lot, but that makes sure that we kind of solve that issue. And when you ask them that question, you can instantly rule something in and out, which makes your life and the climber's life an awful lot easier.
And altitude is a diuretic anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, so part of the byproduct of acclimatization is urea. And urea is removed by the body via urine. So yeah, you will go to the toilet more, and that's completely natural and what to expect.
So I'm finding this really interesting because I've been trying to learn more about what happens to the body when you start feeling the effects of being at altitude and then on to altitude sickness. Now, I know I use it a lot as a general term, altitude sickness and AMS, but there's two different types, isn't there?
At the most severe cases, yeah, it splits. So I think you're talking about Haste and Hape is probably where you were
Yes.
going with that. Yeah. So they're both classed as severe symptoms of altitude sickness. You get mild, moderate, and severe. And haste or HAPE are probably as serious as it gets from the altitude world. Haste is high altitude cerebral edema, so that's fluid on the brain. And then you get HAPE, which is high altitude pulmonary edema, which is fluid on your lungs. They follow slightly different pathways and they follow slightly different precursors. So, like headaches and things like that tend to lead more towards haste style symptoms, and fatigue, coughing, particularly like blue lips, or I think you've seen it on cases where people start coughing up like sputum or like foamy bits, that's fluid in your lungs. Both of those are obviously very serious symptoms, and both of those need a urgent medical attention, and b you have to get off the mountain. Like it's not a case of I'll keep going, I'll see. It's like no, if you're getting to that stage, you've got to come off the mountain. But yeah, they are at the most serious cases. You get haste and HAPE, and they do have slightly different pathways. But for the ease of use, we tend to band them together just as serious symptoms of altitude sickness because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which one you've got. Both of them are kind of terminal to a trip, so to speak.
See, I normally say to people when we're especially on a summit night like Kilimanjaro and people are worried about how will I know if I'm really struggling with the effects of altitude, they normally ask this as we start the trip. And I just say, trust me, you will know. You know, you will feel so rough. And in fact, it's gotten to the point where I have only had I've only ever had to send one person down because the others have all gone, yeah, I'm done. I'm coming down because you do feel so rough. And that's way before haste and hape, isn't it?
Oh, God, yeah. And you ask that question like, oh, how will I know I'm suffering? Well, if we're asking that question, you're not suffering because you've got the cognitive ability to ask that question. Like, it really is that simple. And like, it does come down to the case of you either know that you are cooked and you're struggling, or somebody tells you that it's time to come down. And like, it's not one of those things. I hear it a lot. It's like, oh, I'll just push through it. I'll muscle through. You know, I'm used to training hard. Like, I run marathons. I'm used to suffering. This is a very different sort of suffering. Like your body is shutting down, your body is starting to stop functioning. Like this isn't a my legs burn or I'm breathless. This is like a completely different feeling of just fatigue. Of your body is, as I say, it is just starting to shut down, and it does just need to come down. And it's not something you can really fight through or push through or anything like that. And the people that you tend to have to send down are those who are suffering from kind of cognitive impairment. You don't actually realize how ill they are. You know, we've all probably been out and had a mate who's had one too many, is stumbling around and gone, oh, I'm not that drunk, I'm not that drunk, I'm fine. Yet they've been cut off at the bar. Like, this is exactly the same. They don't realize how ill they are until maybe afterwards. And that's where somebody else has to step in and make that decision for them to keep them safe. But as I said, like to clarify, like that isn't common and that isn't the norm for people, but it is to understand that can happen.
You made a really good point there. And it's something that I know that you and I have been speaking about over the last couple of years. And it's why I'm such a big advocate for guided travel, especially when you're going to places like Everest Base Camp and Kilimanjaro. Because what I say to people is my job is to keep you safe. And having been to Kilimanjaro and Everest Base Camp and Machu Picchu and all those places multiple times, I know how I feel. I know what to look out for with other people. And it's always in my briefing before we climb Kilimanjaro is if I say you're done, you need to listen to me on that because at that point, you aren't thinking straight. You're not cognitively coherent and you need to accept that. And it can be really challenging. I think people get very blinkered. They get, you know,
Summit fever.
summit fever. Yeah, that's a really classic example, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's dangerous. And you know, every guide wants you to summit. A guide never doesn't want you to not achieve the goal. But at the end of the day, they also want you to come home and be safe, and that's really important. Like they always have your best interests at heart. And at the end of the day, it's the guide or the head guide's rule that a word that goes. And if they say you're done, then it is in your own best interest and it is in your best well-being to heed that advice and come off the mountain, because you've got to stay safe. And there are bigger things in life than just climbing.
Absolutely. I remember, again, it's only once because we are talking about extreme cases.
Yeah,
But I remember once, I got into a conversation with somebody who was completely cognitively incoherent. They were falling over, they were stumbling, they could barely speak. And I remember saying to them, look, it's my job to keep you safe. It isn't going anywhere. It's just a pile of dirt. And I know that's such
yeah.
a derogatory way to talk about a mountain because they're beautiful. I said, but the point I was trying to make in the moment is it's not worth dying for. It's not worth
No,
injuring yourself for. If you want to come back, I will happily come back with you and we'll do this together. But
but right
you're just
now,
going to be exactly
yeah.
right now. It's not
And
worth
I
it.
think that's the case. It's like those cases are rare, they are extreme, and you normally get to that point because somebody's hidden their symptoms from you beforehand because they want to summit. Like good guiding teams and good guiding companies will stop you climbing, which is why we see so fewer cases in the modern world. It's like a lot of people, for example, on Kilimanjaro just won't leave high camp. They will just stay there. They'll wait for their team to come up, wait for their team to come back down, and then they'll head down. And that is purely because the guide has said before they even start, like, you're not safe to climb. You can't climb. Like, yes, you might be able to get to 5,300 meters, be in that sort of state, and have to be turned back around. But that's not good for you. It's not good for me, and it's not safe. So we're just going to stop you here. So even though they don't get to those serious symptoms, it's a case of you would have got there. We just stopped you getting there to keep you safe. And that's the key. It's like you've got to break it down when it comes to altitude of those who have no symptoms at all, those who may summit but may struggle, and then those who may not summit at all. And they're the three brackets that you see. And it's just understanding where you fall into that spectrum. And I say this to every single climber, particularly those heading to big mountains. It's like all I ask for every single climber that I work with is that when you get to base camp or when you get to high camp, you've done everything you know is reasonable to give you the best chance. And as long as you're happy with every decision you've made in your training journey, whether that's training, not training, this, that, or the other, it doesn't matter. As long as that's the right decision for you, then we fully support it and go ahead and do it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good thing for people to hear as well. Now, there's something else that's come up a lot with the research that I know a lot of people listening, if they're thinking about going to Everest Base Camp, if they're thinking about going to Kilimanjaro, it comes up all of the time. As far as I understand, you and I have always had the same opinion on this, but I'd really like to ask you the question for those listening. And that is, when it comes to altitude tablets, anything to do with taking additional aid to help you at altitude. I think I can name some of the big ones. There's Diamox, is a really, really popular brand. And it's altitude sickness medication. A lot of people will take it, but I'm really keen to get your opinion on how people should go about even looking into whether or not they need to take it.
Yeah, so Diamox is a drug name, so it's a type of drug. So it's made by lots of different companies, but its medical name I think is something like acetylcholine. I can never pronounce it, but it's made for glaucoma, so it's actually made for your eyes. But a byproduct is that it can, and that's a key word, it can help some people at altitude. Doesn't work for everybody, and the scientific literature is very kind of hit and miss on it. But essentially, what Diamox does is artificially boost your blood saturation for short periods of time by changing your blood acidity. So what that can mean is for short periods of time, it can help you deal with altitude a little bit better. As I said, it doesn't work for everybody, but there is some anecdotal evidence to show that it does work. In terms of how people go around doing that, they have to go to their GP to get it. It is a prescription drug at the end of the day, and you are technically misusing it. So a lot of GPs won't actually prescribe it, or they may be hesitant to prescribe it. So we've always found travel clinics tend to be easier for people to get it from. Go and speak to your GP first. If you're on other medication, you have to make sure it mixes. It's not something you can just take on a whim. But in my opinion, Diamox does have a place in climbing. I think it is a really useful tool, but it's not something I ever rely on, or it's not something I ever recommend for people to pin all their hopes on. The reason for that is it does work, or can work, sorry, but there are some drawbacks. For some people, it has no impact to altitude, and for others, it can actually mimic the symptoms of altitude sickness. So headaches, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, all of those things Diamox can give you. It's a diuretic, so you've got to add an additional litre onto one to what you're drinking. So if you're on 3 to 5 litres, it's now 4 to 6. And for me, probably the biggest thing I had, because I've taken Diamox as a trial before, is it gives me tingly fingers and tingly toes, which is really disconcerting. I can't sleep with it. I can't really feel my feet. So when I'm walking, I can't really feel the ground very well. But my opinion, I know I'm going to speak for both of us here, is that with Diamox, like, it's a completely personal decision. If you want to take Diamox, we 100% support it. As long as it mixes with the medication, you know your dosages and you tell your guide you're taking it, absolutely fire away. And just make sure the guide is happy with that, because some guides are, some guides aren't. But if you don't want to take Diamox, then that's completely the right course of action for you as well. When I go climbing, I always take Diamox with me. I always have it in my bag as a just in case. So if I do really start to feel the effects of altitude, or I've climbed a lot, but even I know that, just because I've been fine before doesn't mean I'm going to be fine this time. If I do start struggling with the altitude, I can take a Diamox, and that can be part of my strategy for getting off the mountain nice and quickly. So I kind of take myself out of that high risk environment.
That's really interesting. I've also heard people talking about taking it when they feel ill, but then I've also heard people talking about you need to take it consistently. So is there a difference between the two, whether you're taking it daily or whether you only take it when you feel the effect?
I think the best thing to do on that is go and speak to a GP, because they'll be able to
Mm.
talk to you about the dosages. They'll be able to talk to you about how to use it on the mountain and things like that. Like, they're the ones that will prescribe you this drug, so they're going to have to be the ones that talk to you about the dosages and stuff like that.
That's perfect. I completely agree with that. And it's a question that I know that I get quite often when
Yeah,
we're on trips. I think it's really good for us to be able to go over it and just offer a little bit more insight. But
yeah,
absolutely, I completely agree. Go and consult a GP before you're doing any of this. And my recommendation, as I said at the beginning, was if you are serious about training for altitude and if you are looking at giving yourself the best experience possible, go to the altitude center, do a consultation, and just get that insight into how altitude affects your body. Now, Nick, I know that you help lots of people climb mountains. We've got the Everest season going on at the minute. You've got a crazy number of people that you've
it's
helped
been busy.
get ready for that.
Yeah, it's been busy. It's been a record season for us. So we shall see how it ends.
It sounds like it's been absolutely hectic, and I know that you deserve a good break, but you're probably not going to get one because then it goes to Aconcagua season, and
Oh,
we go
we've
into all the rest of it.
yeah, we've got Denali, Pakistan, and then September we've got all the stuff like Manaslu as well. So it's a never-ending cycle now, ranging from Everest, Denali, K2, Manaslu, Choyu, Aconcagua, and then you throw a couple of Ahmadablams in there as well. So my big job here on site is I tend to work on anything kind of 7,000 meters plus. So that's what my year's focused on. But yeah, it's a never-ending trail of people doing silly things.
So, with you sending people away to big mountains all of the time, what's your favorite mountain? What's your favorite thing to go and do? I also know that you are more of a cyclist, but do
Yeah,
you have a preferred mountain or adventure, or is it
I do.
secretly, is it cycling?
No, I do like riding my bike, but I have got more and more into the mountains actually. I'm going to take a bit of a left ball one here, but actually the favourite mountain I've climbed, I actually climbed a couple of weeks ago. And it's probably going to throw everybody off given the fact of everything I work with. But it's a very, very small climb called Latrig in in the Lake District. It is something like 360 meters high. So a vast amount of altitude training was needed for that. But it's actually the favorite because it's the first one that I took my son up. So the first Wayne ride that he climbed. So for me at the moment, that's my favorite. One that I want to go and climb. I think that's an interesting one. The back of my head, I'd love to do a ski descent. I think those sort of things are really cool. Not only climb the mountain, but ski down it. And there's two that have stood out for me, I think, that I would like to have a crack at. The first would be Lenin Peak. That's a really nice ski descent mountain. You've also got Choyu, which is 8,200 meters. So from a ski descent perspective, they look great. And there's something about Denali as well. Denali's always had an appeal for me, just the physical nature and the physical demand that it takes to drag a sled across the Arctic Circle. Like that sounds quite appealing as well. So they're probably three on my bucket list I want to climb. Of ones I have climbed, it probably would be Latrig at the moment. But as I climb more with him, I imagine that will change as he gets older and older and older and starts to actually climb them himself and start picking where we're going. I'm dreading that day because I'll get dragged all over the Lake District. But For now, I can control where we're going to, so I can make days nice and easy and always include a pub at the end of it as well.
That's such a good answer. That's brilliant. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate you taking the time to come and have a chat and talking about all things altitude. It's a topic that I find really interesting. I think a lot of people listening will find it really interesting as well. Before you go, I've got two final questions, and I have given you absolutely no preparation for this. So I am fully prepared to give you a minute to think about it. But it's something that I'm asking all of the guests who are coming on the podcast at the minute. So I've got two questions. The first one is, what's one moment from your travels that has changed the way you see the world?
That's a very interesting question. Um, So for me, probably the moment that stands out for me is when I was quite young, probably 16, 17. I was lucky enough to do something called the Explorer Belt, which is basically an expedition that the Scouts Association put together. You get dropped off in the middle of nowhere. So my year, the year I did it was in Sweden. You get given a map and you get given a very, very small amount of money and basically told, we'll meet you here in 10 days. So we were dropped 320k away from our finish point, told to get there in 10 days. And we had a series of challenges to do along the way. And probably that changed my mindset about travel a lot, because you had to be completely self-sufficient. Okay, Sweden isn't a third world country, but you still didn't even know where you started, didn't even know where to start on the map. We had something like £3 a day to live off, and you were completely dictated to by people's help. So we were lucky enough that we slept in people's front rooms. We kind of worked on farms to like have dinner and stuff like that. So that for me was probably what changed my view of travel the most. For mountaineering, it was the trip that we went to Tukal a couple of weeks ago. I really enjoyed that trip because it was we took our team here at the altitude centre. We took a couple of clients as well, and it was a really nice trip to give a lot of our team their first real experience at altitude. We run an intern program, so the guys that we had this year had never actually been climbing before. So we took them out to Tukal for the weekend of climbing, and watching them actually experience it and enjoy it and kind of put all their knowledge into practice was really nice to see, because as I said, I've climbed before, you've climbed before, but for them it was their first time, so they really enjoyed that, and that was good fun as well.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it sounds like it was the most amazing trip. And I was out there at a very similar time to you. And I know that we had some crazy cold weather
It was
out there at
freezing.
that time of year. So
Freezing, yeah. It was
I
minus 15, minus 16 on the summit. Like, it was full winter kit. Glad I checked the weather forecast before I went, because I definitely packed my big jacket and my extra gloves that day.
it's definitely the coldest time, like in that time of year
Yeah, it was
was crazy. It's the
nuts.
coldest it's ever been up there for me.
Yeah.
Um, the last question I've got for you is, what has adventure travel taught you that nothing else in life has?
Uh, this answer I can answer very quickly. It goes beyond adventure travel, but it goes to sport and extremes. Is that it's taught me that it's an equalizer. No matter what walk of life you come from, no matter who you are, whether you come at this from lots of money or not a lot of money, whatever level of fitness, it doesn't actually matter. If you put the work in and you put the training in and you put the drive in to achieve whatever goal you've set, and that can be running the London Marathon, that can be doing a sprint triathlon, that can be climbing Mount Tukar, all the way through to climbing Everest. It doesn't matter. The mountain kind of rewards those who put the work in and put the graft in beforehand. If you don't show the mountain or don't show the event any respect, don't train for it, don't kind of respect the challenge, it will eat you up and spit you out. But if you come at it, give it the respect and put the work in that needs to be done, and that isn't spending money, that isn't kind of having the flashiest kit, that isn't kind of doing anything else, that is the long, hard graft of training, then that kind of shows, and you'll have the trip and you'll have the experience and you'll have the race or whatever it is that you deserve. So for me, it taught me that it was the equalizer of sport and of mountaineering. Like, you put the work in, you achieve the goal that you want to achieve.
Such a good answer. I've definitely found that adventure travel levels you, and it
Yeah,
puts you, as you
massive.
said, on an even keel with everybody else.
Yeah, 100%.
Climbing those big mountains humbles you very, very quickly.
It really does. Yeah, I've had this chat with numerous people, and actually, there's a very famous British climber I spoke to who's just summited Everest now, and he said to me, when it gets to Camp 4, it doesn't make a difference who you are, what job you have, how much money you spent. Everybody's in the same boat. You are sitting in a tent on the South Col, either having summited Everest or about to summit Everest. everybody's body is breaking down, everybody's in the death zone, and it just doesn't matter at that point. All that matters is kind of your will and determination to get moving. And I think that's a really big thing to say. Like, at the end of the day, it is an equalizer. It does level the playing field, and you get out of the climb what you put into the climb. So train hard, climb easy.
Well, Nick, thanks again. This has been a really, really interesting podcast to record for me, and it's so good to be able to catch up with you again and talk about all things altitude, because I do find it a fascinating topic, and I've learned some stuff today as well. So hopefully everybody listening has found it really, really useful. I will be including links to the stuff that we spoke about in the show notes, and obviously a description of what we've been talking about. If you are looking at getting tested, if you are looking to train for altitude in a more serious way, then do go onto the website, do check out the Altitude Centre, and book in a consultation with Nick and the team. Nick, thanks again. I really do appreciate it. It's been fantastic.
Our pleasure to help. No, I'm going to go back to tracking dots up Everest now. So even in the time of recording this, we've just had one more summit. So they really are coming
amazing.
thick. Yeah, they are coming thick and fast. So it's that time of year. It's that time of the day for us now. So I'm going to go back to tracking some dots, and fingers crossed by the time I next see you, everyone will be up, down, and most importantly, back home and safe.
Brilliant. Well, congratulations again, and thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Cheers, Jake.
Take care, Nick.
Cheers. Bye.